Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is my favorite living fantasy author, Stephen Brust. He's a great guy, love his writing, and we spend the first hour of this conversation speaking about writing and, the process of imagination and paying attention to the page and critique and writing groups and stuff like that. Very engaging. And then we switch gears to speak about his family history. His family was very invested and active within Minneapolis politics, specifically union politics over the course of last century. And I learned a lot about the relationship between Stalinism and his effect on unions during World War II in America and the Trotskyist or Trotskyite. There's one that you're not supposed to say. The other one's okay to say. I can't remember which, but we get into that in the episode. Stephen's like an uncle to me, and we very strongly disagree politically. We are totally polar opposites politically, and yet we're still able to listen to each other and exchange ideas. It's a wonderful friendship, and I'm really glad that I'm able to produce this, both for his archives as an author and getting more of him out there, and also for my own benefit and for the benefit of people like you who choose to listen to us. So without further ado, here is Stephen Brust.
But we're here.
How are you?
I am well. How are you? I'm sorry about your teeth.
It happens.
Yeah. But I'm against it.
You're against teeth?
I'm against teeth needing fixing.
They should just go away.
They should just always be good. I'm now going to smoke a cigarette for you. Please hold your applause until after the performance.
Wow. Ta-da! Did you ever do any magic in your wild
Yeah, I liked stage magic a great deal at one time. Never did... Never got good at sleight of hand, which is the real stuff. I did, could do a little tiny bit of it effectively, but how should I? There's sort of three kinds of magic. There's the kind that uses specially prepared devices, the kind that's just flat misdirection, mind games, if you will, and sleight of hand. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the best guys combine all three in the same effect. And I was never very good at sleight of hand. And the cool thing about sleight of hand is, for the ones who can pull it off, is it's impressive even if you know exactly how it's being done. You can just admire the skill of someone and,
Yeah, like gymnastics on a very small scale.
Exactly, yeah.
Prestidigitation.
Right. Did a little contact juggling, but and a tiny little bit of sleight, but really card tricks. And when I was way into it, had the various devices that
It's
spring-loaded boxes that had false backs, that kind of stuff. And those aren't if you know what's being done, those lose their effect.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever flirt with becoming a carny for a summer?
No, never did. Never felt the least desire for that. Did you?
No. I did juggling's about as fancy as I've ever gotten. Just a bunch of different 3-ball tricks and stuff.
Juggling is a glorious metaphor. For the one time I played with it, which never went anywhere. I never even got the basic 3-ball down solid. But it's a lovely metaphor for so many things because what I learned was juggling 3 balls is easier than it looks. Everything else that you add to that is harder than it looks. Changing the pattern, adding a 4th ball, any of those things, which means if you want to impress somebody, stick with the 3-ball juggling and stop there, kind of, because everything else is so much more difficult for such a minor effect.
Yeah, what I learned was just persistence and muscle memory. Just
Right.
you keep on doing it, you keep on doing it, and then eventually the body just knows. The body just knows.
That
And
makes
then
sense.
and then you can add on top of that. And then I learned probably like 5 different patterns and then just mix and match until I drop something and then restart.
Yeah. The other thing where prestidigitation and where magic, stage magic, and writing coincide is the audience's unwillingness to believe that you went through all that trouble for that tiny little effect. I actually caught Penn and Teller once. Actually saw how they did a part of one of their effects. And it was a classic example of that. It was the, Penn and Teller, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the one where Teller's in the water tank suffocating and, they go through all the theatrics of him. And part of the effect is how long he's been down. And they have a clock, which is counting. And I realized that clock was going like 20% faster than a real clock.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they went and they built their own clock just to slightly increase the tension of the trick.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's exactly the kind of thing you do. You go through incredible in writing as well. You go through this incredible amount of setup and everything to sort of ramp up the tension a tiny little bit.
How do you know that you're building tension? Do you just have to feel through it, or do you go over and you read and reread it and kind of imagine that you're reading it for the first time?
Both of that. The thing I talk about, we had a panel on this at the Narrativity, our tiny little local craft-oriented convention. But it's my... All right, when I was teaching writing at a writing workshop called Viable Paradise, the center point of my presentation was about writing in reader head, which is knowing what the reader is thinking at this moment. If you can be aware of that as you're writing without it getting in your way, which is the tough part, it allows you to play all kinds of games. It's why cliches are your friend, because you can break them.
And you know how people will respond to them because you've seen cliches or people respond to cliches
and
over and over.
The person is way ahead of you. I have a limerick I wrote. Would you like to hear my limerick?
Yeah.
There was a young man of Honshu who tried limericks in haiku, but what makes that funny is knowing how you are going to process it. He stopped. Why did he stop? Haiku, 17 syllables, and being aware of that is how you can achieve some of those effects.
But the flourish is that but, because that clause thing, you're ending on a, what would you be ending on? What would that be?
An augmented fifth. Wait, no, sorry. Well, cliffhanger in a way.
Yeah.
But of course, then it works out to that, no, it's not a cliffhanger. There's a reason for that ending there, and, and it's surprising, and yeah.
Is the opposite of expectation satisfaction? And do you like to be a tease, broadly speaking?
Nice question.
And how do you know that you're not abusing the expectation? Or does it matter?
It matters, and I don't always know, and sometimes cross the line. I like to believe my critique group and then later my editor, Claire Eddy, will catch me at it and smack me down if I go too far. But But yeah, my previous editor, Teresa Nielsen Hayden, used to really get on me for that, for doing that too much. And she was right. I just recently reread a bunch of my books in preparation for writing the next one. And one book in particular, I caught myself asking the reader, how should I put this? Concealing information from the reader in an unfair way, if you know what I mean. If you're gonna palm a card, you've got to do it elegantly. And up to a point, you can do things like, "Hey, reader, I am palming this card. So don't forget that this card has been palmed. I'll be bringing it back later." You can do that for a while. Readers like that. They're like, "Oh, it's a thing." You do it too much, and it's
predictable,
not fun anymore.
Yeah,
It's sort of like you feel the writer isn't playing fair with you, and readers don't like to feel cheated. When I'm reading, I don't like to feel cheated. So yeah, I do have a problem with that. I do push that too much sometimes. And
why? What do you think it is about your style or your personality that you want to do that?
I put more emphasis than is needed on a surprise ending. I like a surprise ending. Surprise endings are fun. I never saw that coming, blah, blah, blah. You can put too much weight on that. The best stories don't depend on surprise, on something concealed being suddenly revealed to be a thing. That can be a nice addition. Oh, and there's this going on too. That gives us a little burst of pleasure. Yeah. But look at, Lord of the Rings, Lord of Light, probably my single favorite novel.
Who's that by?
Roger Zelazny.
Yeah.
And it's not, as it develops and as it unfolds, while it's not predictable, it's also not based on, here is this thing I've been concealing that suddenly comes up.
Yeah.
And I do love the feeling, the surprise, here, unexpected thing just happened. And yes, I set it up nicely, blah, blah, blah. You can do that too much, and I tend to. And that's what Teresa used to really rag on me about. And she was right. So that's one of the things I'm working on is finding the right balance where, some of that surprise adds to the effect of the story, but not to the point where the reader feels cheated by information being withheld.
What we're talking about now is, it seems like you're the master. I'm still a student, but it seems like this is talking more about plot rather than, and there's other aspects of the story that make it good. I guess character, and then I guess on the very lowest level would be style, just sentence style, and and then dialogue style and wit and all the different things that go into that. Plot's always been the hardest thing for me.
I figured out the secret to plot.
Is it going to be a surprise ending?
And that's to have no idea what's going on until the end of the book, and then have people say, "You're really good at plot," and I go, "I am." I don't know. I love to just let the story develop. I don't always work that way. Just write the next thing and see what follows it. But I like to. I mean, that's one of my favorite ways to write. It's more fun to work that way because I can tell myself a story. And it's also a good check. If I'm bored, I can be sure the reader's going to be bored.
Yeah.
So I can just, all right, here's how to plot. I came up with this on Twitter. You might have seen it a couple of months ago, I think. But I just, one, something cool happens as a result of previous setup. 2, There are consequences.
Mm.
3, if it hasn't resolved, go to 1.
Wait, so 1 is something cool happens. So you have to have something cool happens.
Something cool happens as a result of things that were set up previously.
Yeah.
And you start the book that way because every character and world and so on has a history before the first sentence.
Yeah.
Unless you're writing the Bible.
Well, even that.
And
it's
even
got
that,
2
really,
beginnings.
Yeah. So, you're right. So, something cool happens, and then you examine the consequences. What would follow from that?
Mm-hmm.
And if that hasn't resolved the book, then you go back to those consequences, which are then the setup for the next cool thing to happen.
But when you're working specifically with the Vlad books, you're on book what number out of what number?
Let's see. Uh, 16. I'm working on 16. 15 is going to be out, has been delivered, and will be coming out at some point. I hope.
It ends on the 17?
Ends on 19.
Okay. All right. So you have 3 more then.
3 more.
But
I'm working on one of those now.
And at what at this point in that project, are your options ever limited with what you do? Are you ever wrestling with being painted?
I'm sure they are, but it doesn't feel that way.
It doesn't feel that way. So you still feel like you're inventing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, I'm sure in the back of my head somewhere there's this, can't do that.
Okay.
But how should I put this? If you're driving through fog and you don't even know exactly what the destination is, but you started in California and you're going east, okay?
Okay.
And you kind of want to take back roads as much as you can, right? Because that's where the interesting stuff is. But fog keeps coming up periodically, so you don't exactly know where you're going. In fact, given that you're driving east, once you've hit one of those roads, there's a whole bunch you're not going to take because you don't want to turn around and go all the way back, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't think of it as, those are things I can't do now. You think of it as, okay, here I am. And while generally wanting to go east, what are interesting things I can go? What side roads look good? Do I want to hit the Grand Canyon? Mm-hmm. And once you're past that, once you've made your stop in Reno and gambled for a night, you move on and you don't necessarily think to yourself, well, I guess that means I'm going to have to skip Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. But because even though that's true, you're no longer thinking of what's behind you.
Okay. Yeah. And
did that make sense?
I think it did. For some people, it probably will. But being involved in this when did you start the first one? That was 86, I want to say. 85?
I wrote it in 1980.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Sold it in 81. It came out in 83.
Okay. So this is now, you're beyond the 40-year mark of driving this particular route or this continent. So there must be all these kind of landmarks that you've glimpsed that will never even make it in there, right?
Oh, yeah.
You have just
but that, of course, is one of the things I love about this the most. I occasionally will get comments from fans who seem to be amazed that I had this one thing set up all the way back and then it paid off later. No, that's not what happened. Okay?
They're retconning your creative process.
Kind of. It did happen, but that's not how it happened to me. That's not how I felt about it. Huh. Can we do a spoiler in here, you think?
Yeah. As long as you alerted to it and we just...
Spoiler. the classic one of those is the reveal that Kyra and Sethra are the same person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I knew that in the first book, but it wasn't like, okay, I'm going to hold this behind my back until I've written 18 books or something, and then, or I guess 10 or 12 or whatever it was, and then suddenly reveal it. Because for one thing, I didn't think I was writing a series. I thought I was writing just one book.
Bastard. Little did you know.
Little did I know. But the thing is, that bit of business, that they were the same person, and knowing that made things a little deeper for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And helped me write, and helped me put things together, and helped me straighten out their two characters and keep track of them that way and make sure they were never in the same place at the same time, all that stuff. And then I'm writing Orca.
Mm.
And about, halfway through I go, oh my God, what a perfect reveal it would be if I just suddenly revealed that they're the same person and it came out in this book. So I went back and planted a few clues in that book for how Vlad figures it out. Yeah. And so, in my head, it was never I'm going to set this up and then it'll go off end books down the line. There are thousands of tiny little details that I know that are never going in the books.
Yeah.
But help maintain the reality for me, help deepen it, and
Yeah.
And every once in a while, one of those might come up and go, hey,
here we go.
Remember that? You could put that right here. End of spoiler. Okay.
So when we're talking about the way that you wrote, there can be regret or like, I didn't do it good enough. But do you ever have to deal with regret with what the story did, like how the story happened? You're like, oh man, I wish that didn't happen because I have a better idea, or like you were saying with looking back, you just don't.
Not really. That's more like I decided not to go to Las Vegas.
Okay.
Decided to drive through Reno. That's not 100% true. I will occasionally get, small things of, oh, wow, I could have put that in there. Okay. Too late. I can't do that now. But they tend to be little things, bits of business that I think of now and, could have gone in here or there.
Mm-hmm. What about establishing a relationship with an editor? How do you know you got the right one, and how do you navigate?
Oh, I can answer that. Yeah, I can answer that. Dumb luck.
What percentage of your writing career is dumb luck?
80 to 90.
Oh wow, you're such a dumb luckster.
A cover. Getting the most magnificent covers you can imagine. Yeah. I've had 3 editors in my career. Terry Windling, Teresa Nielsen, Hayden, Claire Eddy, and they're all wonderful and have taught me immense amounts. The biggest single piece of luck is, since I am not constitutionally able to write to a market, that means that I have to write what I think is cool.
Yeah.
And the biggest piece of luck is that there are other people who agree. Yeah, that's cool. I'll buy that.
Yeah.
Another piece of luck was a weird timing thing that happened with my 3rd novel. And my career got accidentally boosted by pure random chance.
What, like,
do you want to hear that story?
H.W. Bush getting elected or something like that? Or what world event coincided with
Not a world event, a publishing event.
Oh, yeah. I want to hear it.
I wrote my 2nd novel, The Rain in Spain, or whatever it's called. I don't know, something like that. And it was an incredibly difficult project. I wrecked myself writing that one, and
This was the dialogue-based one, am I correct?
Well, there's a
One
lot
that's
of
almost
they're all
pure dialogue.
dialogue-based ones.
Yeah,
This
this one's.
the one about the revolt in heaven.
Oh, okay, okay. I was thinking the Vlad canon, but yeah.
No, my second book was about the revolt in heaven, and I was just wrecked after that. It was such a hard project, and
I
and
want
so
to ask about that, but go on with your story.
So I said, I said, okay, I got to find a way to recover the joy. I'm going to write something that's just flat out fun and I can breeze through and enjoy. And so what do I do? And then I went, the characters from my first book, I mean, he's got to have more going on. I could go back to Vlad, write another story about him. What would be fun? Maybe I'll go back and do an earlier one. All right. So I wrote Yendi, which I consider one of my weakest books, exactly because I was writing it for sheer fun. Yeah. I wasn't careful enough. I mean, ideally, you find a balance. You love doing the work. You love writing this, telling the story, but you also put some hard work into it to get it right. And that I kind of left out. It was just a romp. So, all right, but I'd finished it. This would be the mid-'80s. In the mid-'80s, the way fantasy has now dominated the science fiction fantasy field was not true. I mean, that's the kind of thing that varies over time. Everything was science fiction. That's an exaggeration.
Could you explain why? Is it because of Asimov or some big names just working there?
Not a clue.
Something about the 80s was just very technical.
Yeah, I mean, even we had Fritz Leiber, the Fafhrd Gray Mauser stories. Christopher Stashif, I think, was working then. R.A. McAvoy was coming out then. Megan Lindholm, and so on, and Emma Bull, of course, with War for the Oak. So, and Jane Yolen, and others. So it wasn't complete, but the field was nevertheless dominated by science fiction. My editor was Cherry Windling, who, well, she doesn't really give two pins for science fiction. She loves fantasy. She passionately, deeply loves fantasy, fairy tales, poetic resonance, which I don't do, but never mind. And she was sort of freelance editor for my publisher at the time, Ace Berkeley. So anytime she had the opportunity to get a fantasy title in there, she was jumping at it, because that was sort of her campaign. If you look back, it is astonishing how many fantasy writers who emerged in that period were discovered by Terry Windling.
This was her.
Pat Reedy, Pamela Dean, Will Shetterly, Emma Bull, Megan Lindholm, practically everyone except R.A. McAvoy. So that was sort of her campaign. All right. Sorry, I've gotten way off subject here. What happened was, as I finished the book, I sent it to my agent. Right at that moment, a well-known writer, and I don't know who, I have kind of a suspicion it might be David Gerald, but I can't swear to that. But a well-known writer told Berkeley that he wasn't going to have his book done on time. Okay, it was going to be late on a project. Now, here you have to understand the insanity of publishing. There is in the field what is called the lead title. I don't know what form it takes now. Back then it was each publisher would produce a magazine type thing for marketing and send it to the jobbers and the distributors and the chains saying, here's our titles for this month. And there was the lead. That is the first, the big one. If you got an Asimov, if you got, A
Your flagship.
Zelazny,
Yeah.
yeah. You got a Le Guin. This is your lead. And then there's the second and the third, and then there's some reprints. So logically, what happens when the guy who's scheduled for that lead slot says, I'm not going to have a book for you? In any reasonable world, what would happen?
The second one would be bumped up, yeah.
Exactly. This isn't a logical world.
Oh.
This is, oh my God, we don't have a lead for that month. We need a new book to put into the lead slot. So someone, probably Susan Allison, who was editor-in-chief at Ace Berkeley at the time, said, we need a new lead title for this month. Terry, can you find us a fantasy novel? And she's going, a fantasy novel as lead title? You damn betcha, Ratface.
Huh.
And called my agent, who represented me and Pamela Dean and Pat Reedy, Will Shetterly, Emma Bull, our whole little group, and said, do any of your Minneapolis people have a book? Why, yes. Steve just delivered another novel set in the same world as his first novel. Grab. They made me change the title, which was fine.
What was it?
It was originally called Duel.
Oh, okay.
And because even then I didn't think I was writing a series.
Series, yeah.
I was writing a book, and then I'd written another book related to it, and that was it. And they said, well, his first book sold really well, and it had a funny one-word title. Can he find another funny one-word title? And I said, well, Yendi kind of fits that one, so sure. I called the first one Jureg. I'll call the sequel Yendi. That's cool. And anyway, that meant that early in my career, well before I'd earned it from writing skill or sales or anything, I had a lead title. Once you've had a lead title, unless you really screw up, that's where you're going to be from now on. You are now a lead author.
Wow.
So I became a lead author much, much earlier than I deserved. And that's why I was able to quit my job in '86, my day job, and start writing full time. So we were talking about luck. That was a huge one. That one bit of business that someone, maybe David Gerald, maybe somebody else, was late on a book is why I was able to have a full-time career after only a few years.
Was there a lot of... How did the pressure work out? Was there pressure on you to then think of what your fourth book would be? And
no. I have never had... I know that's something that happens, okay? I know of various publishers who are, will damn near force a writer into a certain rut.
Okay.
That's another piece of luck. Neither of my publishers, neither Ace Berkeley nor Tor, has ever... I mean, Ace didn't care, write what you want. Tor even went the other way at one point. The editor there, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, who was sort of my acquisition editor, if not my line editor kind of thing, was actually pushing me to go outside my comfort zone at various times and do new things, which something else I much appreciate. That was important for me. But yeah, they've been I mean, if I write a Vlad novel and then, I write I guess you'd call it a one-off, something that's just utterly independent, I'm not going to get as much money for that, anywhere near as much money for that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But that's how the biz works.
Well, yeah.
And
you don't have a market, but you do have a fan base.
Yeah. And so, I really like it that I've never been pushed to keep doing X, Y, Z.
What was it about Rain in Hell that you learned not to do again?
Oh, I wouldn't say I didn't learn not to do it again because it was just I'd set myself a very difficult goal. I mean, I'm trying to tell the story of the revolt in heaven. Yeah. I'm trying to stay away from cliches. I'm trying to make every character sympathetic and reasonable.
Okay.
And I just didn't have the writing chops to do that.
Okay.
The single best advice I ever got as a writer came from that.
Like Lucifer, like while you're writing him, just gives you the best advice.
No, when somebody in my writers group did.
Okay.
I had about a third of it done, and I'd been running it through the group. And I was talking to Will Shetterly, a member of the group, and I said, I should set this book aside for 10 years. I'm not good enough to write it. And he said, you're right. You're not good enough to write it. You should write it anyway. 10 years from now, you'll write something different, and you'll be that much better for having gone through this. And he was absolute. I did that, and he was dead on. I learned so much doing that.
Okay. That reminds me of a kind of a, I don't know, I don't mean this derogatorily, but somebody who hasn't written a lot or who has an idea for a book. I haven't heard this in a while, but I've heard that people like don't want their idea to be stolen. And it's like, no, it's not. The ideas are a dime a dozen. Like, actually, you should practice on having 100 ideas. It's the execution.
Yeah, the problem is never the idea. I mean, that's like we were talking about stage magic. How far are you going to get where, hey, I have an idea. I'm going to do a trick where my head is separated from my shoulder and talking to the audience from it. Okay, nice effect. How are you going to do it?
Yeah. Do it.
I mean, somebody probably could. I've heard from experienced magicians that there is no effect you cannot create if you work at it. But having that idea counts for nothing. Having a cool way to execute it, to bring it to the audience so it works, is the whole game. Yeah,
that's the game. So there wasn't anything within Rain and Hell itself. There wasn't like that you were trying to. It sounds like you bit off more than you can chew, but it wasn't about the genre of dealing with.
No. For one thing, it was so very heavily dependent on characterization, which was a weak spot of mine, in my opinion. Which is part of the reason I wanted to write it. Frankly, the next two books were Terrain in Hell and Yendi were both my effort to teach myself right characterization. Okay. In Terrain in Hell, it was a plot that doesn't work except for nuances of the character. And even with that, I failed, but I learned a lot trying. And Yendi, one of the weaknesses of it is there are too many characters. People who don't really belong in the book.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which I put in because I was practicing the telling detail, as it's called. I wanted to teach myself to just give a quick sketch of a character, so this person would appear in the reader's mind with as few words as possible, and it was fun doing that, and so it didn't conflict with the main goal of the book, which was to remind myself why I love writing. But it's one of the reasons the book is weak. I mean, I should have given it a whole nother pass, taken out some of those characters who didn't really add anything, and checked continuity better. I'm sure there are continuity errors in Yendi, because I couldn't be bothered to do the work to check everything the way I should have on that one, just because I was joyriding.
Do you still take the tact? I always get those mixed up. Of approaching a project with, I want to learn something, or I want to get better at something, or I want to try this thing.
Not as often now, but yes. Yeah. I did those two deliberately as a teaching mechanism for certain things. Yeah. The next one was Broke Down Palace, which was okay. Now let's use some of that stuff I learned and see if I can turn out a book that's different. Tekla was supposed to be another teaching book, but then it went off on its own.
Wild horses.
Yeah, and it kind of goes like that. So some of them, of course, are so long ago I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I know that periodically I will identify. I'm not the one I'm currently working on.
Yeah.
Lion. The result of that read, to remind of my reread of the books, we talked about this earlier, was realized that, stop doing the palm the card thing. Stop hiding things from the reader unfairly.
Mm-hmm.
The opposite of that, which as a reader is what I usually prefer, is cool thing happens, there are consequences. That's coming to that conclusion was where that tweet came out.
Okay.
Do the thing, have the consequences, and I'm trying to train myself to do that in Lion.
Okay.
Do the thing, have the consequences.
Does that work into the character of the Lyran? Because every book is about a house in this fantasy world, and they all kind of have a character. I would
say that method does not speak to the Lion particularly, but the theme of the book and what the ideas that book is playing with very much do.
I guess I don't want to spoil something that's not even out yet, so we don't have to go down that
okay
road. Are there do dreams hit you? Like dreams themselves, you wake up in a dream and you're like, oh no.
Never had that.
The subconsciousness that you're working with is strictly within the word processor, kind of.
Yes and no. I'm pretty sure my subconscious works on things, but it doesn't emerge as dreams. It emerges as ideas I get the next day. And I had one experience once. I was at almost exactly the halfway point of the not Baron of Magister Valley, Viscount of Adralanka, the 3-volume novel.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the Parfy novels. I don't know if you've read those, but it's this thick brick of a book cut into 3 parts, and I was like halfway through it. And I remember thinking, there's got to be a thing here. And I don't have a clue what it is, but something vital has to break right here and turn things around. Just because the feel of the book demanded it. You know what I mean? It's it's the term I've heard from colleague Marissa Lingen is writer proprioception. You know how the thing has to feel. Yeah. It's like the way you know where your arm is, even if you're not looking at it, you just feel it. Mm-hmm. The book has that feel. And I was so I'm halfway through, and something has to break here. Something has to twist right here. And I don't know what it is. And I went to bed, and I didn't dream anything, but I remember woke up, and I sat up in bed and said, he's going to become a bandit.
Ah, yeah, I remember that part.
And I raced to the computer before I don't think I've ever before wrote before I had my coffee. But I just dashed there and started chopping away. It was really fun.
Huh.
Those are moments you live for. But yeah, I actually came out of a deep sleep and just sat up with, oh!
Do you ever, in the experience that I've had with writing projects is that they completely form a bubble around me, and I'm in that world, I'm in that project, and it took me a long time to be able to sustain that amount of attention and frame of mind. Have you ever been broken out of that in the middle of a project and then have the project suffer, or are you able to sustain the tone of voice and the imagination?
I've been broken out of moments of inspiration and not gotten them, not, in that sense, and hated it a lot. But you have to understand that my view, at least, of inspiration is that it doesn't change a single word. It just makes it faster and more pleasant. It's a joyful experience. But the passages I write when I'm inspired and the passages that I write when I'm grinding them out, from a perspective of 10 years, don't look any different.
Mm-hmm.
And they both require the same amount of revision later.
Yeah.
So yeah, the only time I can think of not the only time. The most clear-cut, sustained bubble that way was Agyar.
Mm.
I was in the middle of a conversation with my brother-in-law. All the pieces, he said something that put all the pieces that had been building for ages together, and I went, "Oh, I just found a book." And I said, "Excuse me," and I went upstairs, and 6 weeks later there was a draft, and I have no idea how that happened. I was just in there reading it, going, oh, I didn't expect that. Okay, oh, that's kind of cool. I like that. I wonder where that came from. It was just an amazing, joyful experience. I loved it so much. But you can't make that happen, you know. You have to create the conditions for it and hope for the best.
So you do writing workshops. Do you like teaching? Do you like doing that?
Love teaching. I love teaching. Love. For one thing, just in a practical sense, if you've ever taught anything, you know that teaching is a hell of a way to learn. There's nothing like, wait a minute, okay, how do I explain what I'm doing? What am I doing? Oh, I'm doing that. In order to but the other thing is, oh my God, watching students who are completely committed to craft, watching them light up and dive into it, and it's like they're drinking, and they're filling up, and the passion about the same thing you're passionate about. It's I could fall in love with every one of them. It's just it's rapture to have that experience and be around people who are so committed to it, to learning, and just to feel like I have a part in that is amazing.
Were there any particular moments in doing this that particularly blew you away?
There was one that blew me away. I think it was VP 17, and this had nothing to do with what I taught, by the way. It wasn't. It was just the quality of the students. One of the things we did as part of it was, each teacher would give a lecture, and then there would be various, other things going on. One of the things was we'd do critique sessions of, I think it would be 6 students and 2 teachers. And we'd go over, and in the course of that, each student would have a story critiqued. And I remember at one point sitting there while someone's story, was workshopped, and here I had the problem with this, I had a problem with that, blah, blah, blah. And somebody said, okay, I want to know more about this, but you shouldn't tell me. Which is, I was just blown away. That is such a high level of skill at critique, because that is so often that is absolutely right. Here, I'm going to give you an intriguing thing, and I'm just going to let it be intriguing. Don't slow the story down by explaining it. I never need to know. It's good job. Nice, And I remember just going, wow, these people are awesome.
Speaking about your relationship with the editor and these critiquing groups, what is a good critique, or how do you approach that? And I guess it's like writing. There's good things and bad things, and you can't really learn it. You either do it or not, maybe. But
for me, the key to a critique, when it's my story going through it, and I guess I kind of feel the same way when I'm doing someone else's. Critiques are not a strong point for me, by the way. It's one of the things I need to get better at. But
maybe that's your next book.
I don't see how I can help critique someone else in my book. That would be tricky. But I mean, giving critiques is. But to me, if I am receiving a critique on a story, the end game is not making the book better. That is a very important and wonderful bonus. The end game is improving and honing the editor who lives in my head.
Okay.
Teaching me things to watch for.
Okay.
Try to avoid making the same mistakes too many times. And to get better at my craft.
Yeah. Yeah.
That to me is the big priority.
I think that is probably a big piece of advice for people who want to write, is that you need to run to critique, but also know how to incorporate it into your.
Well, it's hard.
self.
I mean, I have a whole long lecture on how to do a critique group right.
Oh.
The only correct way to do a critique group, and everything else is a mistake.
In a long lecture, is this another limerick that turns out to be a haiku?
No, it's probably about 5-10 minutes. But it's there is only one way to do it. And the fact that I know groups that violate every one of these rules and are very successful, we will ignore that.
Mm-hmm. Just like any piece of advice.
Yeah, yeah.
That critique grouping thing, that writing's kind of a solitary.
Let me interrupt. I forgot to say the thing that was leading to, which is the main one, is you don't need a critique group. Don't treat it as an automatic thing. I must have a critique group. That's probably the biggest mistake. If you find people who are genuinely helpful, yes. If it helps you write, yes. But don't take this automatic assumption, if I'm going to get serious about writing, I must find a critique group. No, you don't. If you want to get serious about writing, you must write.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
just
sorry.
That reminds me of whenever I've been asked several times when I was writing, was the first and foremost thing I did before I found this weird medium that we're using right now to tell stories, was people are like, they come up with this new software and they're like, should I buy Ulysses or should I buy this other software? Will this help? Will that help? I'm like, the tool, you need to fill up a page. All those tools, like.
Yeah. By the way, are we recording this?
Yeah.
Okay, just wondering.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
I had to point out.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I'm just curious.
Well, speaking of
great
that,
conversation anyway. I mean,
Well, yeah. We floated the idea of giving, adding to your archives and speaking about your mom, because she, her 100th birthday was just last month, was it?
August 31st, yeah.
Did you want to talk some about her and her life?
Yeah. There's just so many stories about my mother. She was, starting from when she was a teenager during the Depression, of course. During a tremendous movement in this country, the masses, the forming of the great industrial unions and mass strikes everywhere. And that was the period she grew up in. And she became a revolutionary socialist, as did many, many, many people during that period, and she stayed with it all her life.
Was she born in the States?
Yes.
Yeah.
Born in. I don't remember. Her family moved around, so like every one of my uncles and aunts was born in a different city.
Oh.
My grandfather was a salesman at the time and was moving. I think at one time he had a hardware store. Is that right? And eventually he had a construction company. But yeah, one of my favorite stories is. All right, so. This would have been like in the late 70s. No, it wouldn't. Sorry, late 60s or early 70s. Shortly after I became politically active.
Wow, you kind of were politically active from the womb then.
age 12.
Okay. That was your grade.
My first activity was being at a protest against Governor George Wallace, who was running for president on the pure racism ticket.
Oh.
It's not what it was called, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
He arch segregationist. And we were in protest at the Minneapolis auditorium and got maced by the cops. So that was my introduction to politics.
Maced at 12.
Yeah. But so shortly after that, and I don't know how old I was a know-it-all punk kid, 14 or something. But there's this packing house in South St. Paul. It's an armor plant. And it's got a history. My parents started dating during the 48 strike there. Dad was at Armor, and right across the way was a Swift plant. And it was very romantic. He was in beef kill, she was in bacon slice. And they quite literally started dating on the picket line because mom had another marriage fall apart, and she was living at home with her parents, and they wouldn't let her go out on picket duty. So Dad had to pretend to be taking her on dates. And eventually he was. They tell the story. There's this beautiful drive in St. Paul called East River Road, which is right up above the Mississippi, and there's a lot of grass, and there are occasional picnic tables, and it's just a whole strip, long, beautiful, beautiful area. And so while they were dating, they went and had a picnic there, and a South St. Paul cop happened to be driving by and recognized them from the picket line. And rolled down his window and said, "Are you guys picketing here too?" So anyway, that was then. Back in the late 60s, I guess. It was the middle of the Vietnam War. And it was... and the hatred of Nixon throughout society was greater than anything I've seen before Trump. And to us, politically, there were sort of two sides of it. There were the conditions of the workers that they were facing every day, which they're much worse now, but even then they were not good. There was a lot of anger. And there was this war going on. And drawing the connection to that and showing the common source of those problems was, what we were doing. It put us, so we would be taking our revolutionary newspapers and selling them at places where there would be a lot of students, a lot of young people, and also to workers. And every week we were at that armor plant selling to the workers as they came out of the drive. And the plant was way back there, and there was a long road and railroad tracks. And then the road continued and ended on a 2-lane highway. So the workers would be coming out this long road at the end of the shift and then turning onto the highway. And we'd be standing there on one side of the tracks or the other, selling our revolutionary newspapers and getting more and more response as people got more and more angry about both the war and Nixon, and as the ideas of one, as the connection got clearer, if you will, both from what we said and more from the lives people were having. So the South St. Paul cops, generation after took an interest in us and started harassing us. And so we'd either be on one side of the tracks and they'd say, "You can't be there, that's private property." Or we'd be on the other side of the tracks and they'd say, "You can't be there, there's a public highway. You can't stand on the highway." And every week they would tell us something different. And Finally, Mom got sick of it. So we're sitting there with me and Mom and two other guys. Selling, and more and more people are buying the paper as things increase, and the cops said, okay, you got to be on the other side of the tracks. And Mom said, you harass us every week. You tell us we got to be on one side or the other. Pick. We'll take whichever side you want. And the cop says, we can arrest you. And Mom said, okay, we'll talk about that. And she gathers us together into this group, right? There's cops. I mean, you have to understand, my mother's this 5'2" dumpy little woman, and this cop must have been about 6'6" or something, right? The two of them are huge. At least to me, they looked huge. And they start to follow us, and Mom turns around and holds her hand out as, no, you wait there. We'll tell you what we decide. The cop's like, Jesus. So you get into this group, say, so do we want to be arrested? Well, we got that meeting Friday. We can't be in jail for the meeting. All right. So we'll leave. And yeah, okay. So we break out and she goes, all right, we're leaving now. We're going to be back here a week from today. You can arrest us then. We never saw the cops after that. That was it.
Yeah.
Like, we're done.
Was she part of the writing of this paper? Was she a writer herself?
Yeah. She was pretty explosive during the strike. I mentioned before, the 48 packing house strike. Mm-hmm. Governor Youngdahl called out the National Guard against the strikers, and there was a mass protest at the state capitol. And Youngdahl came out and gave a speech explaining why he did it, why he called out the National Guard, and so on. And Mom was all the way in the back and kept saying, somebody should answer him, and she kept getting pushed forward. She ended up being the one to answer him. And I've never found the damned article, but it's at least family tradition that one of the Twin Cities newspapers wrote up the event referring to her by her previous name, Jean Paddock, and calling her Little Mount Vesuvius.
So she had a response.
Yeah, she told him off.
Huh. Was she always working on the level of outside of government? Did she ever participate in like a council or elected representation?
She ran for office, I think, once or twice. But you have to understand, in revolutionary socialist politics, running for office is something you do as a means of trying to get your ideas across.
Okay.
Finding a platform, trying to, spread the word and so on. It's not like she expected to get elected.
Okay. But the participation.
Dad ran for governor too.
Oh, your dad did? For governor?
Yeah.
On what ticket or what platform?
I think it was, the name of the party at that time was the Workers' League. So I think it went on the ballot as the Workers' Party because it had to have the word party in it. Mm-hmm. And any Workers' League party would have sounded really dumb.
How have you seen that their activity, specifically in Minneapolis, did that lead to other things? Do they have kind of a, what was called like a heritage or a reverberation in the work that they did with establishing things?
I think they were part of something that did. Yeah. Minneapolis is a wonderful place to live, the Twin Cities, in a lot of ways. They're the highest proportion of parkland per capita is Minneapolis. The second is St. Paul, and the third, whatever it is way behind that. Plus a lot of museums, a lot of pretty good, fairly good public services. A lot of those are being attacked now, but it's good. Has been at times or in the past very good schools. The reason for that is because of the 1934 General Drivers' Strike, which was a huge, basically shut down the city. Was Teamsters Local 544.
And by general drivers, are you talking just like some sort of freight trucks or something like that?
Right.
Just delivery service things?
Yeah. Teamsters.
Yeah.
It was Teamsters Local 544. And that was the heart of it, but it spread to the entire city, which previous to that had been controlled by the Citizens Alliance, which was a group of businessmen.
Yeah.
And the whole events of that strike in 34 carried forward and ended up creating a labor party called the Farmer Labor Party here, which was eventually destroyed by Hubert Humphrey and the Communist Party, and basically liquidated it into the Democrats, which is why in Minnesota the Democratic Party is called DFL, Democratic Farmer Labor. That's all that remains of the Farmer Labor Party now. But the Farmer Labor Party elected a governor, Floyd B. Olson. And again, it was never, a tremendous, it wasn't revolutionary, it wasn't earth-shattering, but we can still see the effects, when we step outside and look at, the kind of the layout, the city we're living in. And so Mom and Dad were very much a part of that tradition because they were recruited by the same people who had led that strike. The 34 General Drivers' Strike was led by Trotskyists. And at that time, the Trotskyist Party was the Socialist Workers' Party. They no longer are, but, leftist politics. You know how that goes.
Pondering it. It's still a black box to me.
All right,
but it is interesting that the stress was on the workers. The stress was on the farmers. It was really rooted or the drivers. It was really rooted in a blue collar or farmer tradition. Yep, and that still reverberates.
Mostly blue collar. That was the essence of the leadership of the thing was the blue collar workers. And of course, then we have a generation later. You've got not as much as a lot of other Midwestern cities, but you had the Great Migration from the Deep South.
Okay.
To escape Jim Crow.
Okay.
And that had effects here as well, and added to the Union militancy because it's always the most oppressed layers, the ones with the least to lose, that are in the forefront.
Mm-hmm. Do you know much about how the integration of the migration from Jim Crow South and the integration of that into the leftist politics in Minneapolis worked out, and what kind of
I know bits and
cultural mixtures they had to...
I know bits and pieces of it. I can tell you, I mentioned that my grandfather started a construction company. A house building company. He'd build a house, sell it, take the money, use it to build another house, and eventually build a business. He built the first integrated housing project in, I think, the country. Not the first non-governmental, that is, the first private one. I think there were a few others that were sponsored by the government. But he would build, in this period, a block of houses, and he would insist that the people on each end and in the middle were different races, and then open it up to everyone after that. And it was the first time that had been done in this country, and that I can't establish a precise connection between the radical events of the 30s, the Great Migration of the 40s and, my grandfather's work in the late 40s and in the 50s, except I'm sure there is one. It was part of the whole feeling and atmosphere.
Okay. Do you know much about what prompted your grandfather to do that?
Well, he was an immigrant. Was it him or his parents? I think he was the immigrant, or maybe as a child, from Tsarist Russia. And the anti-Jewish pogroms instilled in him a hatred of oppression, which he gave to my mother and many relatives of my uncles. There are some who never became directly involved in politics, but you can tell have that humanism in them. Another one of my uncles, another brother of my mother's, is a very well-known First Amendment attorney, passed away now, named Ken Tilson. He was one of the defendants, or one of the lawyers for the American Indian movement. When Dennis Banks and Russell Means were arrested, the three lawyers, Kunstler, Lane, and Tilson. Kunstler, of course, was the one who got the publicity. Lane and Tilson did the work. My uncle also, since I'm bragging, put like one of the final nails in the coffin of the House Un-American Activities Committee.
This was, I'm really don't want to be on camera not knowing exactly, but that's McCarthy.
Right. This was after McCarthy was gone, but the committee still continued subpoenaing people and trying them for being un-American.
Yeah, okay.
And, and there was at that time 2 ways you could avoid answering their questions. One was by taking the Fifth Amendment. By pleading, the Fifth, say, I don't want to testify against myself, because they had made being a communist a crime. I think, and I'm pretty sure it was the Democrats, by the way, not the Republicans, who pushed that bill through. And there was another that I don't recall, and my uncle invented a third. They subpoenaed him because he had been a member of the Communist Party years before. And, of course, the whole thing is get the person up there and make him name other communists. And my uncle wrote to them and said, what law gives you the right to issue the subpoena? And they replied with the law, which had been passed in, I think, 1951. And every time, and so he came in, and whenever they asked him a question, he read a statement into the record, which was in essence saying that according to the U.S. Constitution, you cannot be prosecuted for any crime that was not illegal at the time you committed it. Therefore, I will answer any questions of my activities after the period, after the law was passed. And it apparently generated a lot of excitement in constitutional circles, and like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And at that point, HUAC just said, fuck it, we're done. And closed up shop.
Oh, wow. What did your parents do during the World War II?
Dad fought. He was drafted.
Oh, really?
And
Where did he
in Europe.
end up?
He was in Europe. He was point often. And he said he was very lucky that he wasn't point more often, or he wouldn't have come back. But he was, but he spoke German, so he was the one in front, and they would send him in. And he would yell, asking the Germans to surrender as they were going through Germany, building by building.
Oh, wow!
And Mom was working at packing at Swift and was not permitted to leave because that was considered an essential industry. And during World War II, if you were in a war essential industry, quitting was illegal. Oh,
weird. Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody was drafted across the board.
I guess you could say that. I mean, it wasn't exactly because they didn't force her to apply there. But if you were working there at the time Roosevelt signed the law that said, you know, you may not quit a war essential industry, you were stuck.
Mm.
And since the unions that existed at that time, this all ties back to itself, had agreed to no strike pledges.
With
that
the government?
meant you were stuck. The government, yeah, they or with their employers at the behest of the government.
Okay.
And this is going to tie back to McCarthy in a really interesting way, by the way. Since they'd signed those agreements, you were stuck working at whatever wage the employer wanted to pay you, and that was it.
Oh, wow.
And here's the way it ties back, which is fascinating. Those no strike pledges. At the time of entering into World War II, in the late 30s and into 41, that era, the Communist Party had won leadership of positions in many of those unions. Well, the Communist Party was under the command of Stalin.
Wait, what? Wait.
The Communist,
American?
Pretty much all of them. I mean, they were, they would follow the directives from the Kremlin. Once Hitler attacked Stalin, the instructions to the communist parties in every country were to support the war against Hitler. Therefore, they got the unions to sign the no strike pledges because it would have worked against Stalin's interests to have workers on strike in the middle of a war. Of course, the workers themselves were not super pleased about this. And that is the reason when we go, the bitterness and hatred of the Communist Party itself comes out of that. So when McCarthy came up and efforts to break up the unions and destroy union militancy, focusing on the radicals, that's why the workers were not willing to defend them. Because they still remembered these goddamn no strike pledges they'd had to sign.
Yeah, wow.
And so you could say the Communist Party, as was its tradition, cut its own throat. and in also doing so, exposed other leftists, even those who had opposed the no strike pledges, to their effects.
Okay. How did do you know much about how Stalin had such power that everything communist during that era was under his
not everything communist, the Communist Party, CPUSA, the Third International, as long as it existed. It was
that's quite some reach.
Oh yeah, but you have to understand it's hard to see from this vantage the amazing inspiration and excitement that went through the working class in pretty much every country in the world with the Russian Revolution. It had, it was a massive millions and millions and millions of people going, oh my God, we can do something about this. We can improve our own conditions. We can take control. Mm-hmm. And the prestige of that and the feelings and the trust developed by that carried on years after Stalin had pretty much turned it into its opposite. There was still immense loyalty. The shakeups within the Communist Party, Orwell talks about the reversing history and rewriting history in 1984. The way that happened when Stalin signed the Stalin-Hitler Pact and suddenly Hitler was a good guy. And then Hitler turned around and attacked Russia, and now Hitler is a bad guy. I mean, that really undercut the communist parties.
Yeah. Okay.
The Trotskyist movement gained immense numbers of recruits because it had been saying all along, this is the nature of the Soviet Union. This is what it's going, this is how it's going to do. And they would refuse to listen until events showed, oh, yeah, okay, I guess you were right.
What separates what's the defining characteristic of the Trotskyite?
Trotskyist, by the way.
Trotskyist. And how's that different than
Trotskyite is what the Stalinists called us when they were murdering us.
Okay. Shit.
We don't, not so much crazy about that term.
Okay.
Probably, I mean, there's so many things, but probably the key element is internationalism. Is seeing this is seeing it as a class issue.
Okay.
Throughout the world, Stalin, in coming to power, it wasn't like just simply a matter of an individual. It was a matter of the circumstances that permitted an individual to become a dictator, and that was also a class issue. He was counting on those elements within Russia that were afraid of the revolution, rejected the revolution, basically middle-class elements. And he also turned to those same elements and counted on those same elements throughout the world. That's why in the Spanish Civil War, Stalin sent shiploads of arms to the loyalist forces, but refused to unload them unless they pledged to support the middle class. It basically, in essence, disarmed them before Franco. And that was because to him everything was subsidiary to maintaining the bureaucratic caste that was ruling Russia, which was a very difficult balancing act. One of the most future historians are going to look at that with amazement, that they were maintaining is like standing on a tightrope for 50 years. Because on the one hand, world revolution would have destroyed the bureaucracy. They would have shown that they were pointless and they were sitting on top of the society, preventing democracy, taking the best of everything. Whereas a restoration of capitalism would have also destroyed the bureaucracy. So the activity of the Stalinists for that entire year, those entire years from pretty much 1924 to 89 or whenever it was trying to maintain an incredible balancing act. But gaining, it's like, how can we keep give us enough aid to the North Vietnamese, but not so much that they actually establish a communist society, because that would be terrible. And same with North Korea, Cuba. And they ended up supporting a lot of bourgeois democratic national independent movements, if you will, which were based on the local capitalists rather than foreign capitalists, but never, ever, ever on the working class.
So a Trotskyist is aiming toward you called it internationalism, but that sounds like globalism, but globalism's kind of something totally different. I assume.
That's my, yeah.
And internationalism, with regards to the working class, is more in control of how the different countries operate amongst themselves. Is there?
Okay, to put it in simple terms.
Thank you.
Let's take an auto worker in Mexico. Okay? I would contend that this auto worker working at a GM assembly plant in Matamoros, Mexico, has more interests in common with somebody working at Jefferson North Assembly Plant in Detroit than either of them have with the chairman of the board of General Motors.
Okay. And that common interest, even though it's common similarly between those two people, it's still rooted in their direct living conditions. It's still very local at the same time.
Well, yeah. It's local, but it's about their conditions. They have the same issues. They have the same enemy. That's why this effort on the part of both right wingers and the union bureaucrats to make it about immigrants is so deeply dishonest.
Okay.
It's not about these immigrants or foreign workers, not just immigrants, but also foreign auto workers. They're not your competition. They're your comrade.
Okay.
And because the same people who are attacking your living conditions are also attacking theirs.
Okay.
And so the Trotskyist approach is to unite on class lines and work together.
Okay. And during that's just fascinating that Stalin had those unions do the no strike order in America so that America would be in. That's just, I never knew that.
Yeah.
But the Trotskyites were warning people that the end game of Stalin's version of communism or whatever, I guess Stalinism, isn't actually going to work out. It's still another power structure that is bent on oppressing.
Yeah. And in particular, that the Soviet Union is a complex, strange, complicated place because they did make a revolution. They did expropriate property and put it into the common hands. Okay, that was done, and that was huge, and that was good. But then you've got this clique sitting on top of it. It was the Trotskyists who warned that what the Chinese Revolution was going to turn into. Mm-hmm. That it was a peasant-based rather than a working-class-based revolution, and you cannot create the peasantry cannot play an independent role. It's they're fundamentally middle class because they're so dispersed. They because of the nature of the production, they can be a powerful force, as we've seen many times, in fighting national oppression, but they can't create a society in their image. They can't, a peasant-based program cannot create socialism.
But you're not saying that you need a bureaucracy to do that, but you do need some sort of managerial sense or some sort of higher education or non-agrarian.
The nature of the working class, the fundamental aspect of the working class is cooperation because of the conditions of their existence. Yeah. You look at your screen and say, who built that?
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of people built it and shipped the pieces everywhere. And it's that very cooperative nature. I mean, that permits them to create a society, if you will. They've got the mechanisms already in place in the factories and in the workplaces. Peasants, I mean, if you look at something a peasant grows, say, who grows that? Who grew that? He did. They're isolated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so was Trotsky, did he kind of formulate the alternative to that, you said that clique that sits on top of
Yes.
the redistribution?
Yes.
And how does that work out in his thought?
It's based on what they had established in the first place in Russia, which was the democratic control of everything by workers' councils.
Okay.
A representative government, but a class-based one. In Russia, it was workers, peasants, soldiers. And they would form what was called councils. And the Russian word for council is Soviet, which is where the term comes from. And that wasn't like invented. That sprang up as far back as the Paris Commune. Every time there is a working class revolt, workers' councils spring up. They just, okay, we in a general strike, we got to get, everybody elect representatives. We'll form a steering committee to figure out how to proceed. In Hungary in 1956, during that 1 week of freedom, workers' councils were directing it.
And how did that translate into the United States setup with the unions, or?
It's pretty much completely different. I mean, there have been those kinds of councils at various times during general strikes. There was the Minneapolis General Drivers Strike, as I mentioned, the San Francisco General Strike, the Auto Light Strike, the Toledo Auto Light Strike, and various forms of councils would spring up during those. During the sit-down strikes in Flint, Michigan, which they occupied the factories. You could say that in the 30s, all of the elements for socialist revolution took place, but never were developed, because the elements are occupation of the factories, putting factories, into the hands of the workers, which happened in the Flint sit-down strikes, and challenging the state. And a general strike is exactly that. What a general strike is no, you don't have the right to control us. You don't have you are not in power anymore. They demonstrated that very well at the Battle of Deputies Run. You might want to look that up, here in Minneapolis in 1934, at the old farmers market.
Wow, I didn't know Minneapolis was so bitchin'.
The cops wouldn't show their faces after that. The strikers were directing traffic and running the city.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's the tradition my parents came into.
Yeah. What were like you said with Minneapolis and how it's set up, that there was a lot of thought about the community, or thought about, just with the parks and stuff, is more like just seems like there was design influences based on a certain mode of understanding what it is to be in a city, what it is to be in a society. How did all the activity within the Great Depression kind of eventually bleed into our culture?
That is such a wonderful question, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I bits and pieces here and there, but expressing it that way is actually fascinating, and I would love to. Yeah. I should explore that a little more. I mean, wow.
So when did your parents get? Your uncle got hauled before the House against. Did your parents get any other legal trouble? They just agitated and.
Yep. I remember Mom would talk with one of her girlfriends during the McCarthyism, and they'd be just gossiping, talking about their kids and what the kids were up to and this and that, and occasionally one of them would stop and say, boy, I pity the poor FBI man who has to listen to all of this. They never, we had a brick thrown through our window during that period, and somebody painted Commie Dupe on our sidewalk.
Commie Dupe.
Commie Dupe. And Mom said, must be someone who doesn't know us. We're not dupes. We're the genuine article.
Do you see that? You said so. You pointed out like the torpor within leftist politics. What do you see as the genuine kind of Trotskyist or working class spear within the American left right now, and what is it beset with?
The Socialist Equality Party is. If you're asking what organization, I would say Socialist Equality Party, the World Socialist website, part of the International Committee of the Fourth International. You keep coming back to class, It keeps coming back to a class understanding of the nature of society. And as soon as and your first warning sign of some organization as they're going off the rails is when they get away from that.
They get away from focusing on material conditions.
When they start talking about people as opposed to, when you start smelling a middle class orientation. We want to win over the the middle class elements, the entitled, the privileged, the ones who aren't struggling for mere survival every day.
Okay.
A preacher from the 19th century named Orestes Brownson said, see if I can quote this. The middle class is a great fan of equality when it comes to humbling the class above it, but its inveterate foe when it comes to raising the class below it. And if you're looking for tendencies in what I call the pseudo left, look for that.
Yeah, a dress that says "Tax the Rich" at the Met Gala or something like that. If I may be so bold.
Well, yeah, that's a good example. It's like right.
Is there a way to formulate a intra-class consciousness where the middle class that are predisposed to lifting up the lower class work in unison with the lower class rather than being
absolutely
either vilified by the party or
oh yeah. I mean, we saw that was one of the things you saw in Minneapolis in 34 and in the San Francisco Toledo Autolite is every time when the working class shows that it's solid and united and determined, it pulls huge sections of the middle class along with it, and they're very valuable. You don't get there by adapting to their particular middle class needs. You get there by showing leadership, by showing determination. Which is why, given how things are right now within the labor movement, the complete domination of the bureaucracies that are doing everything they can to suppress the class struggle, you see the middle class, huge elements going in the other direction, supporting Trump. Or, supporting actual white nationalism and Nazism. They're period of crisis, they're going to move one way or the other. And they move with the working class when the working class shows determination.
Okay. The common, I don't like thinking in terms of enemies, but I am my greatest worry about about America is the managerial elite class, the bureaucracy, and you can see that its authority within its various institutions is being mismanaged terribly, and it's using a lot. It figured out like this critical theory. It figured out some sort of program to pit people against each other on a variety of different identity lines, and it's co-opted that into its, where even if you're a professor now, you have to write an equity statement. You have to kind of pledge allegiance to this certain pseudo-Marxist kind of thing where you're standing up for the oppressed, but it is divorced from class. And so I wonder if
you're standing up for the entitled. I guess we could invent the term the entitled oppressed.
The entitled oppressed.
I'm sorry. I don't care what a person looks like. If you got somebody who's making $4 million a year, living in a huge house, driving a BMW, I'm going to have a lot of trouble calling that person one of the oppressed. I can't quite get myself to do it. Yeah. Can we pause for just a moment? I have to bring groceries in from outside.
Yeah.
Be right back.
Okay, so I think I figured a way to pleasantly wrap up our conversation because I've taken two hours. We started talking about magic tricks, right? So what's the tell of this? What's the magic trick that is being played to obscure the Labor Party's work and obfuscate its actual gaining momentum and become building up a working class that is solid, that's tight, and then that pulls the middle class together to kind of reformulate a better conditions for everybody. In its current manifestation, what is that magic trick that people are falling for?
I like that. Probably the clearest way to express it would be the magic trick that it is that the key issue in determining your fundamental interests is up to you to decide. That there's no objective truth, that it's simply a matter of what you feel. The focus on, well, I feel like it matters to me that I am gay or something, right? And that's what's most important, and that it isn't important what's really, therefore you don't dig for what's really happening. That's independent of your will and experience, or independent of your will and desire and impressions. Mm-hmm. On a number of levels, that's the thing that makes identity politics possible. Is the objective factors that determine all our lives, that really determine what become unimportant compared to, well, I'm feeling like this. This is how it feels to me. Mm-hmm. It's a rejection of objective truth, of the fight to learn to understand objective truth, and a complete, replacing it with subjective idealism. With, well, here's how it is within me.
Mm-hmm. So. An empirical solidarity is the path toward a actual change toward the better of the oppressed.
Empirical. Like I don't know if I don't know. I'm not quite sure about that word empirical in there.
Oh, is this a philosophical thing? I just meant like what can be verified as objectively true. Yeah. And finding solidarity in that.
In the determination to find what is most fundamental, what actually, what actually determines the conditions of life, the science, if you will. That's my father's biggest curse word was unscientific. His lip would curl. He would listen to somebody say something and say, "That's unscientific," and you could feel the hatred.
Well, thank you for your stories.
Thank you. You could turn this into two things.
It is two things, but I'm pushing my audience. I like the long form because it acts as a sort of gatekeeping. People have to actually be patient,
have to commit to it,
and be committed, and listen to the human beings that are discussing the ideas rather than the punch.
This is great. You do great interviews. I can't think of anyone I disagree with more and more enjoy arguing with than you. I
was thinking about that last night. Like, I can't believe how much I like this man and how much I disagree with him.
Yeah. It's it's unusual.
Yeah. It's a blessed thing. Well, do you have a let's leave it on this. Do you have a favorite whiskey or favorite drink or a favorite recipe of something that people can imbibe?
My favorite drink is 16-year-old Lagavulin, but since I can't afford that, in actual practice, it's Tullamore Dew.
Tullamore Dew.
Tullamore Dew. Irish
Is
whiskey.
That's an Irish whiskey?
Yeah.
I brought you a bottle of something from, I think, Wisconsin. That was delicious. What we had on your porch.
Yes.
Earlier this year.
Yeah, that was really good.
I should have bought another bottle.
It was a single malt. It was very good.
Yeah.
Oh, and I can give you a recipe. This is a summer recipe because to me, whiskey is 3 seasons. In summer, here's what you do, and I've actually broke the bank and done this a couple of times. It's expensive, but you get a bottle of Plymouth gin and a bottle of a dry sherry. Okay, take a lowball glass, fill it with ice. You do the wash with the sherry. You pour some sherry in, swirl it around, dump it out. Then you put in a shot of Plymouth gin and a twist.
Of lemon or lime?
Lemon. It's really, really good
for a hot summer.
For a hot summer day, yeah.
What's the name of this?
I call it a Travis McGee because that's where I got it. Are you familiar with the Travis McGee books?
No.
John D. MacDonald is the author, and they're sort of kind of detective books, but that's one of his favorite drinks. And I said, I got to try that. And it's like, oh man, this is really good.
Excellent. I'm going to end the recording.